So yeah, this is about zero waste, and sometimes called sort of circular economy, or they're related. And as it says on the slide there, you know, what if we regarded everything as a potential resource? And what if all processes were designed to generate no waste? And what can we do about it, really? So without further ado, this is zero waste. Everything should be designed and made so it can be disassembled for recycling or composting. I mean, that's the basis of it, really. There shouldn't be any zero waste. And as Pete Seeger said there, which I think is a great quote, which you can all read, you know, these things should be removed from production if they can't be reused. I mean, the trouble is that in the last sort of half a century or more, we have added more and more sort of materials into the sort of stuff that makes up all the things, that all the consumer items that we buy, that are very difficult to take apart and to reuse, recycle, repair. Of course, I mean, a lot of components for cars, you know, that's how they make their money, by breaking down, and you have to buy a whole new component, you know, where they could be made a lot better, actually. Fridges, you know, all sorts of things. But, you know, it should be that waste equals food. So, you know, the stuff that we waste should fit into one or the two cyclic loops, either recycled or composting. So got some, that is the thesis of this book, Cradle to Cradle. Are you going to admit, Richard?
Yep, done.
So this book is the sort of fount of all knowledge, really, on this Cradle to Cradle. There are some links that are going to come up like that, so don't worry about trying to write them down, because Kate will give you a link at the end with all of these links on it. But there are other ones as well. So both William McDonough and Michael Braungart, who wrote the book Cradle to Cradle and set up the business Cradle to Cradle, are there's various talks with them, and they're really very, very interesting. And Michael Pullin, who I had the pleasure of meeting, who was one of the designers of the Eden Project, also really fascinating person to look at. I'll probably talk a bit more about William McDonough and Michael Braungart as we go through. But this is their kind of, one of their kind of pictures. I think I've got a couple of similar ones, but those are the two loops, really, which are really important to bear in mind. We've obviously got the biological loop, which is really where I started, and why I became so, how Proper Job came along, really, because it started as just a little composting project on the allotment, and it just kind of grew and grew and moved into other things as well. So the biological loop, I hope, is sort of fairly obvious to you all. You know, you can, plants, you know, decompose. We got fungi and bacteria that decompose it, goes back into the soil. It's just an endless natural loop. And we can, the trouble is that we tend to disrupt that loop all the time. Farmers and growers and just us as consumers, we chuck our stuff in the bin and it goes away. The other loop is the technical loop, is a bit more complicated, especially with the organic and synthetic materials that we have now in the loop, and often mixed together. So if you look at the label on your clothing, it's a big one, you know, you'll often find so many materials all mixed up together. And so that then makes it very, very difficult to recycle. You can reuse it, and you can downcycle it, which means, so for instance, you could sort of shred up various bits of textile and use them as sort of stuffing for various things, you know, or you could use that as a raw material for something else, but it's downcycled. So you might have polyester fibers mixed up with cotton and so on. So it's best, if possible, in these, that's why the disassembly side is so important, because if you can disassemble it, then you can recycle it as a clean stream material, as it's called. And Michael Braungart and William McDonough were invited by Rohan, which is one of the biggest textile companies in the world, based in Switzerland, to design a kind of organic range that they wanted of their materials. They make lots of textiles for sort of curtains and sort of industrial use for all sorts of things. And they said that what they wouldn't do that, but what they would do was look at their entire chemistry of every single material that went into their factory. And it's documented in the book. There are thousands of different chemicals and processes. And they realized that a lot of these chemicals were to sort of mitigate the effects of a previous chemical and so on. So they went through it, and Michael Brangart, being a top chemist, they sorted it all out. They reduced down the amount of chemicals that they used, and they turned their entire production into organic and reusable textiles. So that's the kind of scale that they're working at, which is why I find it very exciting. They also work with the Ford Motor Company, and they've made the biggest green roof in the world for Ford, and have passive heating and all sorts of things. So they're well worth checking out on their talks, because I find it really, really inspiring. So there's just another, that's a sort of one just for the garment industry, but you can see how the two loops can work just within a single, just a single area. So textiles. You'll get these, no, you won't get these slides, will you, Kate? No, but
well, we could put it in a PDF, could we, and attach it?
We could do, yeah, if people are interested in it, or as I always say, if you want to get in touch with me afterwards, I'm very approachable, and you can always send these things. Of course, they're quite big files because of a lot of pictures, but you can do WeTransfers and things. So if people want to look at this stuff more, very happy to share it. And as I said before, the trouble is we've kind of grown up, and well, I have grown up, me and Steve, who are the same age, we've grown up in the sort of an age where we're sort of used to things being disposable and wasted all over the place. And it's kind of become second nature. And we didn't realize the damage that was happening. It wasn't until people like Rebecca Hoskins with her program that she did, what was it called, about in Hawaii, with looking at the plastics pollution, and there are sort of toys from the 1950s washed up on Hawaii, and sort of drift sort of 5-10 foot deep of plastic. So things have been designed to fail, planned obsolescence. But actually, it's interesting when you think of cars and the components. The first people that really brought in the concept of zero waste was Honda, because Honda realized that if they're wasting things, that was money going out of the system. So all their cars are disassemblable, and their components are everything in the cars is disassemblable, and then it can be melted down or reused in some ways, And we're going more and more that's happening. So that when you look at what local authorities do, and I used to work for Devon County Council, and they're always looking at this sort of mass of material, and I think they kind of forget in a way that it's all coming from individual arisings like that. They're just looking at this sort of massive material which they have to deal with, which is quite, it's a really huge challenge for local authorities to try and deal with that. And it wasn't until the early 1990s, when we started our project with Proper Job, they still were not really, they weren't leading the way. There were other community groups that were doing things all over the country, great wood recycling project in Brighton, and good projects in mid-Devon that was picking up recyclables and doing things with it. And then we started doing composting, and kind of pushing the council into doing things better, and kind of flipping that model so that you kind of push it down so that you don't have to pick up so much stuff from the recycling round, but it's kept back in the house, either not entered the waste stream at all. So you've refused to take a plastic bag, you buy better quality clothes and furniture or whatever, consumer items, you buy better quality that's going to last. You can then, so that's the ideal, and you compost at home, obviously, so you haven't got organic stuff going into of course it doesn't suit everybody, there I'll talk a bit more about that later. And then you have source separation when it does go into recycling, which we now see hopefully all over the country, and Scotland, and all over the UK. In fact, Scotland's way ahead of us, generally speaking. So they separate out materials for, then it can be recycled better. Of course, we still haven't really cracked the plastics problem. And then the residual materials are sourced out at what we call a MRF, or a materials recycling facility. And sometimes the organic fraction is taken for anaerobic digestion or composting. And then hopefully there's only a very small amount left, which will be incinerated or go into what we call waste to energy. That's why in Devon now we have these lorries that go around saying 0 to landfill, but actually that just means they're burning it. So that's just to sum that up really. So that's the cradle to cradle, the continuous loop, everything in a continuous loop, as opposed to the cradle to grave, things ending up in landfill or incineration in our case, because we've run out of landfill in Devon anyway. So how can we change that system, and what can we do? So there's things that we can do as obviously as individuals, as communities and community groups at our place of work, local authority and government. And generally speaking, the government and local authority levels are very big kind of super tankers that are very slow to change and come round, but it needs to happen at all those levels at a time. So we got impatient, or I got impatient with waiting for things to happen. So starting projects up seemed like a really good idea. And of course, as individuals, there's a lot we can do. It's great that we've got Morton Hampstead, for instance, has got a fantastic zero waste shop. So you can go and get a load of stuff without all that extra packaging. We're doing a bit within Proper Job as well with that zero waste within our courtyard shop. So obviously we can buy less stuff. I think particularly during lockdown, people have got a bit, they've gone on to Amazon, and other internet shops are available, and people are buying a lot more stuff online, partly because of lockdown syndrome. But as I said before, buy better quality. If you can save up for that better quality, buy it well designed, buy well designed products which can be recycled or composted. Or of course, come to Proper Job, get secondhand pre-owned stuff on other charity shops and other projects. I think this lockdown again has shown us how important it is to support our local economy, to support our local shops, to support our local growers, local artisans, and avoid the big multinationals, whenever we can. So this is what Kate was talking about earlier. We had getting a bit of a frog. When I moved to Chagford, actually for the second time, but I moved here and bought a house in 1990, over 100 years old, and it really needed gutting. It was, it was so old, lead piping, antiquated electric, so much needs to be done. And I saw the builders out in the road having a discussion about, because the road is very narrow outside our house, where were they going to put the skip to put all the stuff that was going to come out of our house? And I told them we weren't going to get a skip. And they thought they had a good laugh about that. They said, oh, you don't know what's going to come out. I said, well, I do actually, because I used to work for a builder. My grandfather set up a building firm. My uncle was a builder. I know exactly what's going on. My dad was good at ripping stuff out of houses, so I knew what was going to happen. And we designed the garden. I just laid out the garden, really, which was a right mess anyway. There was we'd had to clear the garden, and it hadn't been gardened for over 40 years, so it was just brambles and things. It was just hacked down. So it was all kind of put in piles, and I haven't got good pictures of it. I've got this one, which was bricks coming out, which was stacked, but all the other materials were neatly piled up as well. All the metals went in one pile, all the granite and the wood and the lath and the plaster. The only thing we had to move out was some sort of mortar and stuff like that. The plaster went on the allotment because very acid soil. There was quite a lot of old horsehair plaster, which I managed to scrape off after taking off the top layer of plaster. So that went on my allotment. A lot of the mortar and stuff went on to build up the drive on the allotment. The granite went to terrace our garden. The bricks became paths in our garden. You know, it's all been used. I sold the metal to Sammy Harris when we had a scrapyard on Dartmoor. I got money for that, and the laths were used for kindling for years, for ages. So, you know, you've got to think a bit more laterally about it. And I think the builders thought it was going to take a lot of time to do that, but actually it didn't really. It didn't take time, and they found it very, very satisfying when they got into it. They found it very satisfying. The thing is that with we were lucky that we had an old house because those materials were reusable. Now, what goes into modern houses and modern buildings is really difficult because there's so many plastics, polyurethane foams, and you know, all that kind of insulation that was used and other things. The old insulation in houses was basically different layers of plaster, but now it's going to be really horrible. The only thing we had to throw away from our house was there was some bits of horrible carpet and some bits of sort of vinyl, like not proper lino, because proper lino is actually, you can actually compost it, but old vinyl lino, or the more modern vinyl PVC lino, I can't even say it, lino, is pretty horrible. So why is it? That's the title. You know, why do we keep making these problems for ourselves? So we're creating a problem. It's lack of upstream thinking, really. So we need to design things. We need to design our systems better, following the cradle to cradle model, and forming this more circular economy, and not thinking of things as waste. We should ban the word waste, and everything should be a potential resource, you know. I just love that picture. I always put that picture in because it's great. It's from a Flemish composting project, which they sent me their all their materials, but of course it was all in Flemish, so I didn't understand what it was all about, but you can just imagine what's going on. So when we started with Proper Job, this was the scene up at the in the car park. The local authority, Devon County Council, brought 4 kind of builder skips in the early days for bulky household waste. That's because we're a fairly remote community. You know, it's 15 or so miles to the nearest recycling centre. And so people would chuck all sorts of things in there. And I just moved into the house, so it was really useful. Well, I was going through the skips a lot, you know, with the vicar and other people, finding useful things, taking them out again, using them. We got all sorts of furniture and all kinds of things, even carpets off there. And then I started picking out garden stuff. So I was picking out all sorts of stuff because I'm a no-dig gardener, wanted that. So I contacted the council. This is how Proper Job started. I just rang up the council and said, why don't you just dedicate one of your skips for garden stuff? And then why don't you bring a shredder as well while you're at it? Shred it up, and then we'll just take it round to the allotments, which is just around the corner. We can use it on the allotments. And the guy I talked to at Devon County Council didn't think I was a complete nutter. He thought it was a really good idea. So that's kind of how we started. He said, we can't just do that, but what we can do is we can help support you and help you find some money to set up a project and get it going. So, and then we can give you some money and some help. So that's how we started in the early days. It was very chaotic. That's my daughter there, who's now 29, picking up stuff and driving it around to the allotments, emptying out all these bags and composting it up there. So these are quite easy projects to start up in a way. I've helped set up loads of projects all in Devon and beyond. And, you know, we had quite a lot of press coverage, and then I ended up becoming the network coordinator for many years, and talking about compost. So it really got me into sort of community projects. So as a community, there's so much we can do. And this I find this very inspiring too. The Blessed Unrest, Paul Hawken. Again, you can look at, rather than buying the book, although do buy the book, it's great, but just listen to his 5-minute TED talk, which you'll get the link of at the end, because he realized that there are little grassroots projects all over the world who are doing anything to do with, you know, waste, social justice, all that kind of thing. And there are hundreds and thousands of them all over the world. And they are actually the biggest movement in the world. It's just that these little projects are very small little things happening, maybe on a little community garden in Newton Abbot, or you know, a big wood recycling project, or a scrap store in Bristol. You know, there are just so many things that are going on, started by small groups of people. So, you know, and of course now we've got the Extinction Rebellion group. And in fact, I put this talk together originally for Extinction Rebellion Chesham. We've had the Flat Pack Democracy movement, which is about kind of working with your parish council, or even taking over your parish council and running things a bit differently. You know, working when you do get things together, your local authority will be, usually they're very, very keen to work with you and help and have input into their strategic plans. So they have it in their strategic plans. So they're desperate to connect with their communities as well. So it's all about, you know, being inspired and starting something of yourself. If you can't do it on your own, you know, get together with some other people and focus it around different issues. Like we've got the plastic-free Chagford at the moment, you know, and there are so many different kind of groups like that. And as Rob Hopkins from Transition Town says, you know, in his latest book, is called From What Is to What If. So rather than being constrained by what is going on, just allow your mind to wander into what if we did things differently, which is precisely what the Cradle to Cradle site. So I've got a few little case studies to inspire you. Oh, there's Rob's book, From What Is to What If. And you can look him up again on, I mean, there's loads of stuff about Rob on YouTube and other platforms. So many years ago, I was involved with this one. We had having started the Devon Community Composting Network, it was shortly followed by a national network which came along called just the Community Composting Network. And we had projects in Kent, Forest of Dean, Edinburgh, Skegness, Newcastle, all over the place. Wales, there's quite a few in Wales too. And I became the chair of that for a while. And one of the projects was in London. There were a lot of projects in London with the London Community Recycling Network. And this one was on the Nightingale Estate in Hackney, 3 big high-rise blocks, which had become pretty much a no-go area. A lot of drug taking. It was a really rough area. But the guy in the picture there, Cam, ran the sort of little community centre and played a lot of reggae. Was a real aficionado of reggae, and where the local authority couldn't get in, he could. So where they had big problems on that estate with overrun with rats and flies and smell and all the rest of it, and the local authorities kind of got run out of the place when they tried to interface with them, Cam brought them together and asked them what their problems were. And when they said rats, flies and smell and everything, he said, okay, well, we can help you with that. We'll take your food waste away. We'll take your cardboard away, which is blocking up those big chutes which go down the buildings into those massive great bins, and we'll help you. And now they had 100% compliance. They gave them bokashi bins, which is a type of fermentation system for food waste, and the rats don't recognize it as food. It's a sort of fermentation, and you don't get flies, and you don't get ants, you don't get cockroaches, you don't get any of these things that are a problem. And the reason they had 100% compliance was because anyone who wasn't doing it was contributing to the problem. And so the community project would go around with their, see, they got some sort of shopping trolleys. They pick up the starch bags with food waste in and give them a clean bag. And then it was all going into their rocket, that's an in-vessel composting system. And then it would come out of that and go into a wormery afterwards. So that's a really successful model to use. This is another one. This is actually more exciting, but I don't have any exciting pictures of it, unfortunately, apart from this. This is a project I have visited, and in fact, I was on a Radio 4 program about this called Changing Places, when they did a thing called Changing Places on Radio 4 many years ago. And this one's up in Yorkshire. So it's Kirklees and Calderdale Council. And the guy there, Graham Wiles, set up, he was working for the council, he set up this thing called the Green Business Network. So what he took was that earlier slide of waste equals food. If you just remember that, waste equals food. So one company, one business's waste could be something that was needed by another one. So for instance, you can see there's a cardboard box in the top left-hand corner. So shredded up cardboard goes to make bedding for horses. So then the poo and the cardboard that comes off the horses then went into a worm farm. So they were breeding worms. The worms that were bred were going to various things. There was one thing that was used for a kind of petting zoo. They had koi carp and things, but other ones went to feed sturgeon. So the sturgeon were bred to produce caviar. So it was called the Cardboard to Caviar Project. And you can see there were other loops off that. There was a bakery, and then they were doing sort of maggots for fishing. There was a composting thing. There was various different loops. Once you start getting into it, this is what this is really what circular economy is about. Is looking at how you can use waste from one product to do another one. They did I remember him telling me about another project, which was they were doing carpets for big office blocks, sort of industrial carpet, and they realized that, you know, if they put down whole carpets in an office, then they have to rip, it gets worn away down the middle of the carpet, from people walking up and down on it, and then they have to rip up the whole carpet and throw it away. So they did carpet tiles. So they changed it all to carpet tiles, and then they could move them around. So the ones that weren't worn could go into the middle, and they could shift them around. And then when they got too worn out, they could actually go back and be repurposed. Actually, there was some way that they could remake them. So all that kind of thinking, it's that creative lateral thinking. This is a town in Japan, as you can see, Kamikatsu, about the same size as Chagford, which is under 2,000 people. It's not big parish, and they split up all their material, their waste, in inverted commas, materials, into different resource streams. I think they had 45 from memory, 45 different sort of streams that they could for reuse and recycling. And it's all done, that is all done pretty much by volunteers, but with a coordinator. And then they can sell all that material, all those materials get picked up and sold. There's a lot of detail there. 45 categories, that's right. With a 80% recycling rate, which they aim to reach 100% by this year. So, and like Proper Job, they've got a kuru shop about reuse, remaking and repairing. So it's really good. So I think that's a fantastic thing to see. So there are these models out there. There's another great one which inspired me early on, called Urban Ore, which you can look up. When I looked at it recently, there's not a lot on it because they're kind of shut because of the lockdown and everything. But they separated out their stuff into 12 streams, a bit more chunky, and then they had but they have a lot of artists working on their site. They have a big site, much bigger than our Proper Job site in Chagford, and they have artists and they have a cafe, and they have all sorts of things going on their site. So that's worth looking up, Urban Ore. So we've done the sort of individual we've done the a bit of the community stuff. So I wanted to just share a bit about on a bigger level, on a citywide local authority level. This is something I've only heard about very recently because I'm doing a bit of work with Winchester City Council on their strategic plan. And I heard about this from them. So this is a really great example about how a city council stopped so much money leaking out of the city. They wanted to, the local market had been very much run down. And I lived in Preston for a while. I went to art college there for a short while. And the food market in Preston was fantastic. I loved it there. It was a really good, buzzing place, but it had obviously kind of gone downhill quite a lot. And it was going to be bought up by Marks and Spencer's and John Lewis. But one of the local councillors said, what happened if we used our procurement power to purchase from all from local businesses, farmers and growers, to set up these contracts with schools, university colleges, hospitals, etc., and keep that wealth within the city and the region around. And it's been fantastically successful. In fact, I read about it and I didn't get it from that. I read about it in Zootopia, which is a book by Carolyn Steele, which I heard on the food program and then bought the book. It's very, very interesting. There's to look up, and you can see from that kind of schematic how they've moved into other areas like credit unions and having a local bank and working with these sort of what they call their anchor institutions and linking in with worker cooperatives and all the rest of it. Public energy, big part of it. So it's grown out of just that food, but into a lot of other areas. Fascinating model. And there are other models as well, like the Amsterdam is fascinating with Kate Raworth. If you don't know Kate Raworth, I don't think I've put a link to her in the thing. So make a note of Kate Raworth if you don't know her already. She's written a book called Donut Economics, which is a big fat book, but it's really fascinating. But you can watch one of her talks on there. They're all available on YouTube. TED Talks. If you go to TED Talks, she did one in Amsterdam, and she's done others. Really good. There's the book, How to Think Like a 21st Century Economist, and that's her kind of takeaway kind of slide, really, because it's about we're living beyond the limits of our planet. So that the last one there, the ecological ceiling, everything beyond that is stuff that we've overshot the amount of planet we can deal with, because as you probably know, I think here in UK we're living on, I forget how many planets we're consuming. You know, it's over 2 planets. The US is far worse. But in the middle of the donut, there are people there's the red lines in the middle, that's the shortfall. So those are people that are falling out of all those areas. They've not got enough food, they haven't got, water justice, enough energy, housing, all the rest of it is falling beyond it. So we need to be in the donut to be equitable, fair share for all, justice for all, and all the rest of it. And of course for the planet itself. So yeah, back in Amsterdam, which is still Amsterdam, I met up with a really inspiring woman called Deborah Solomon, whose website is there. It's not in Dutch, it's in English, although I think there's some of it in Dutch. And she's been working for years with refugees, all sorts of people. She kind of calls herself a compost artist. I kind of wished I'd rebranded myself as a compost artist, seeing the way that she works. But she does amazing stuff. And here she's getting stuff that the local authority were chucking out. So there were prunings from the parks department. It's all those big lumps of wood and cardboard. And she's making what's called hugelculture beds here, which are like raised mounds. Normally you would dig a hole and bury this stuff into the ground, but she did it on top of the ground. The soil in Holland is largely reclaimed, very, very poor soil. You can see there's a kind of gritty, sandy soil with kind of couch grass growing on it. And she would make these piles, cover it up with cardboard. she's got a tree planted in that one, and kind of plaster compost on top and sow onto it, and amazingly growing incredible stuff with that. She moved there, you can see a bit of the kind of, she's got wood chip mixed in with the soil there. She used a lot of wood chip, creating these community gardens between these buildings, high rise, low rise, flats, building community orchards, building all sorts, loads of tree planting, loads of community gardening stuff going on. Some fascinating stuff. I'll come back to her a bit later as well. And that's kind of echoed with what we were doing in Devon and around the country with our composting work. So this was Chudley community composting, which set up on the allotments there. I think that's sadly finished now, but you know, some of these projects have been going for decades, and some fall by the wayside, others keep going. When you're running projects based on volunteers, you know, they do tend to have a bit of entropy. You letting in Becky and Pete? Well, I thought they were here anyway. What are you doing, latecomers? So this is part of our project. We developed that. That's the sieve. You can see it in that picture there too, because I thought really early on, it's no good getting people all enthused about composting if you're making something that looks really crappy. And the way you can make it look really good is to sieve it, and it's bloody hard work sieving compost. So one of the people in Chagford who was had been an agricultural engineer built us this rotary sieve, and it was so popular that he started building loads of them for other community groups, and now he just has the plans. But they're really, really good, using bits of old washing machine as the in the drum. And other projects like Otter Otters there with their big bag, they in Ossory St Mary, they actually took over the collection round for the local authority of composting for a while, and they even had an anaerobic digester in Ottery, and that was really good. And that was our community composting committee from Scotland, Surrey, Wales and Kent there. And I took the picture, of course. The other thing that Deborah did, which I think was fantastic, and this is really, really inspiring, not really so much to do with what the talk's about, but I couldn't resist putting it in, but looking at on a cityscape, city planning scape, and creating green corridors, connecting people up, connecting projects up. Well, it is to do with the talk, I guess, because what are you making compost for if not to grow food on? And why would you want to do these things? And that's half of one of the loops, the cradle to cradle loops. So we waste so much stuff and so much food. I mean, it is really shocking how much food we waste. So a lot of my work has been in showing people how to safely compost food waste. And then you need that for your community garden. So this is, where was this? Middlesbrough, that Deborah worked at, and looking at that connecting up projects in different parts of the city, creating these kind of green corridors and building on that and reimagining the city as a living place. I mean, I often think, wouldn't it be fantastic in London to open up all the old rivers and liberate them from their concrete pipes that most of them go into, and have some fantastic green spaces around it. And you know, there are a lot of green spaces in London and other big cities, and they could be connected up again properly like that. And that's something else I just found recently as well. That was just a graphic from actually someone who was doing graphics for the Winchester one. They're from that project. So I think, you know, getting artists in to show the visions is so important. If you can see it, it makes it more real, doesn't it? I'm just looking at the time. I can talk forever on this. So I was involved with a European project called Gardenizer, which has got a fantastic website, actually. I don't know if I put that in, gardenizer.eu. And we visited, this is a community garden in France near where Cézanne lived. And you can see it's got this fantastic disabled access. They had an orchard, they had community, like allotment spaces. They had this incredible solar cooking on a mobile little truck. So they were actually, they cooked our lunch. They had a sort of big kind of bean stew going on one of those. Be great if you had more sun. They have more sun down in Provence. And then they were even frying sausages on the other one. So these kind of, and there are so many ways into these projects, that's what I really love about it, is there are so many of them. So that landfill book there, Louisa Hamidi, she invited me to write a bit on that. So there's a little bit about Proper Job and the composting in there, composting project. And she went around all these different food projects all over the UK, food waste movement. So there are people that are freegans, sort of skip diving. There are people that are doing things with waste food from supermarkets, from farms where their food's been rejected from growers and farmers because the supermarkets wouldn't take it. All that kind of thing. Free kitchens, really inspiring stuff that they've done, and of course it really brings people together doing all that kind of thing. And the other one on the other side, the Well Garden Mind, is a book that I read this year, Sue Stewart-Smith, which is absolutely fantastic. And it's about horticultural therapy, really. And she talks a lot about people with, post-traumatic stress disorders and things like that, from how they've been cured and helped through gardening, through horticulture. And, I think I always want to tell people about linking up with their local health centre, with their patient participation group, and getting people out. And of course, things like making compost and doing other things like the plastic-free challenges and all sorts of things that are related to what this talks about can happen through that. So if you don't know about patient participation groups, ask at your local health centre. This is back in France again. That was they were doing compost on that big community garden, collecting from local businesses, turning it into compost. So you can see there, just food waste. That was all kind of rat proof, because you can see it's all on brickwork and kind of clear, a nice clear area around it. So rats don't like crossing open space. So they thought that through very well. This is one of the things that we helped develop for food waste composting. So this is a school in Crediton, but there's loads of schools. There was over 100 schools in Devon. I think it was more like 150 that we'd set up with food waste composting and helping with getting gardening. So another hat that I wear is the Growing Devon Schools Partnership. So growingdevonschools.org. We're networking, in fact, on the 30th. But we go into schools, and we basically, what we do is we're empowering teachers and showing them how they can take children outside, how they can get involved with gardening, how they can get involved with growing and composting, how they can have a better introduction to food culture and all the rest of it. So it's a really important thing, but it's really getting the teachers on board so that they can then cascade it down to the children. And of course they love it. I mean, this club at Crediton School, it's called the Little Rotters Club they have there, and they have a waiting list to get on that. That's in a big city, Nantes, which I went to help launch the community composting network in France. I met some people at an event in back in 2000, I think it was, in Hanover, when they had the big event there. I can't remember what it's called now. What's it called? Anyway, I met with some French people there, and it took them 10 years to get this network going in France, but I went to the launch of it, and they had composting all over the city. It was the first green capital of Europe, Nantes, and they did amazing things there. And composting was just the tip of the iceberg, really. So they were collecting, people would come out with their food waste, mix it with wood chip from the Parks Department. It would go into those twin bay compost things. And they had different systems in different parts of the city, because they had some high rise and they had all sorts of different composting systems. So I better talk a bit faster. Just to show you, this was Rome, went to with the Gardenizer project again. That was really fascinating. So they had all these little community gardens there. Huge, great, huge city, Rome, with massive high-rise blocks everywhere. Lots of abandoned ground that would had burnt out cars, prostitution, drug taking, all sorts of things going on. Really horrible. When they had the financial crash, a lot of people lost their jobs. They were looking out, staring out the windows of their high rises, seeing this ground, thinking, well, let's grow some food. And they just took over from the local authority. Basically, they went, they did guerrilla gardening. Basically, the local authority tried to stop them down, and this particular project was called La Ronza Continua, which means the buzz goes on, and they were very politically motivated. They had a great big pizza oven. They were very socially minded. Fantastic project. You can see it's still quite new and raw there. They had a big herb garden, a sort of medicine garden. They had a children's garden. They had all sorts of things there. I'll whiz through a bit. This is using pallets. This is back to Deborah again, using pallets for planters and picnic tables, finding things that are being wasted and repurposing them. They made these lovely walkways. Those were old kind of rebars from building sites, the steel bars. They were growing hops and grapes, I think, and wisteria and various things over to make these lovely walkways. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about this one, abundance. This is so Anne-Marie Culhane, who started this project in Sheffield, realized that that loads of people have a glut of apples and pears and other fruit and other stuff in their gardens. And so walking around Sheffield, she was just sort of picking up apples off the pavement, and and then going and knocking on the doors of people's houses and saying, do you mind if I take some of your apples, and do that. And a whole project got built up around this. Really interesting. She's moved to Devon now, and she's actually been doing planting along the Exe Canal, putting fruit and nut trees all the way down the Exe Canal, and she's an artist, so she does lots of really interesting things. So a really great person to get to look up. There they are. So people came together and started harvesting all over Sheffield. They took it back they got sort of pop-up shops happening around harvest time, and people could take stuff for free, but they had to do something for it. So they had to either sing a song, do a dance, tell a story, recite a poem, or help, and they would have sort of shared meals and things, so, and did all sorts of events around it. So really inspiring, great thing to do. And getting near the end now, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about biochar, because a lot of, if you live in the country particularly, well actually in the town as well, there's a lot of woody stuff that's cut, sort of brash and stuff that's normally just either burnt in the field or burnt on a bonfire or whatever. Of course it can be shredded up and made into compost, but a lot of it's almost too big for that. What you can do is dry it out really well and turn it into charcoal. And biochar is basically just charcoal mixed with compost or compost teas and that kind of thing. And I have a sort of dream of kind of, rather than having these dreadful machines that go and flail the hedges everywhere and scatter it all over the road, and then you get loads of punctures on your bike, to actually do something useful with it, lay the hedges properly. Of course, it's a lot of labour and cost involved, but to build some projects around that. In fact, there's a project in South Brent, which I don't think I put in here, but they've actually got a machine called a chunker where they chunk up wood and dry it and then sell that for firewood, because a lot of it's big enough for firewood and kindling. That's just a picture of, that's biochar. So that's the charcoal, a little bit of charcoal, tiny bit. As a square centimetre, a cubic centimetre of charcoal has a surface area of a small house. And when it's all completely invaded with bacteria and fungal mycelium, it's quite astonishing. By the way, on the fungi, I would recommend you listen to Merlin Sheldrake right at the moment, Radio 4. His Entangled Life, absolutely fascinating about fungi. He was actually staying with us here in Chagford in our B&B when the lockdown started. There's the Freegans. People, you know, it's estimated that we buy 3 bags of every 3 bags of food bought in the UK, one of them is just perfectly good food, just thrown away. So the Freegans go skip diving around the back of supermarkets and things and rescue it. Take it, they've set up, this is again from the landfill book, set up cafes, set up all kinds of great projects around that free food. I'm heading into the final few slides now. There you go. 55 million cups of coffee a day. You can turn it into fungi. So there's Rob Hopkins at the launch of the urban farm in Exeter. That there's Adam hiding mostly behind a bag of oyster mushrooms grown on coffee grounds and cardboard. They incredible. They just that's what it looked like. That was inside their urban farm in Sidwell Street, one of the places that's been knocked down. I think it's probably been knocked down by now, behind for the new bus station. But they set up that urban farm, and you can do that in the city. You know, there's plenty of cardboard, plenty of coffee. You can grow all kinds of mushrooms. The oysters are the easiest, but they do come in. There you go, another shot of it. They do come in all sorts of colours and sizes too. Rather beautiful. There they are. Yellow ones, red ones. And of course, even when they've even finished, they can go back into making compost. So that's our proper job compost, made from all the stuff that people have thrown away in Chagford over the years. And when it's sieved out through Sam's wonderful rotary Devon sieve, turns into our lovely black gold. There we are. So that's me done. Those are a few of the my email Devon Community Composting Network website still up. Dr. Compost still up. Proper job, of course. Growing Devon schools, and I'm also a member of Moor Meadows. But those are just some of the things I'm involved with. Well, most of the things I'm involved with. Okay, I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Nicky. That was amazing. I expect everyone's got a few questions they'd like to ask, so I don't know if they want to write that in the chat box, and I'll attempt to field some questions for Nicky. Thank you to Kerry for putting up that link, actually. She put the link to the donut economy up in the chat box.
Oh, good, great, fantastic. Or just chip in if you're shy of using the chat box. Just unmute yourself, press the space bar, and say something. Please do. Oh, she's got to change devices. Go on then, Trevor. Ask about biochar.
Okay. Yeah, I'm involved with a little environmental group, and one of the things we've sort of started looking at a bit is biochar, and it seems like there's quite a lot of controversy about whether it's. So we were wondering about it both as a way of sequestering carbon and potentially of improving the quality of soil and so on. But there seems to be quite a lot of controversy about whether it does much good if you dig it into your garden, or whether it does more harm than good. And so I just wonder what your view of all that is.
Yeah, thanks for that. I know there has been some controversy. I think that part of it is because there's a bit of misinformation about what actually biochar is, and if you make charcoal and dig it into your ground, you can do more harm than good. Mm-hmm. That's not what it's about. You have to charge it. So that the clue is it's called biochar So it's biologically charged charcoal. So it has to be first impregnated with the microorganisms. Otherwise, it's not biochar, it's just charcoal. So
Right.
that's one thing. I know that James Lovelock was very keen on, said, you know, if we made thousands of tons of biochar and put that into the soil, that would really help, you know, sequester massive amounts of carbon. I've used it on my allotment, not very scientifically. We have very, very free draining soil here on Dartmoor. It's very sandy and it doesn't hold the moisture very well. And it really helps to hold the moisture, and it also helps to make the get the soil blacker, which is good for sort of absorbing, you know, solar radiation. So it does help to heat the soil up better as well. So I would sort of, you know, look at do a bit of your own research. Albert Bates is very, very good. The Albert Bates book, I think he's called The Biochar Solution, his book. Right. Memory. Bettina might know. Bettina's here, and Bettina and I have been going to sort of Devon Biochar. We had a little kind of a network going for a while, and we went around some different places and talked about it and with different people. There you are, Bettina. Do you remember? Do you want to say anything about biochar?
I don't remember the name. I don't remember the name of the book, but it is the Biochar Solution. I don't remember the author.
Yeah.
There are lots of online like resources about it now. There's different people that researched on it, so you can. I don't like from my head now. I don't know, but there is a lot that came out recently.
Okay, well, we'll look at it. I mean, when we looked, we got a bit confused because there seemed to be some people saying it's the best thing since sliced bread, and other people saying it, oh no. But we didn't come across. It wasn't me that did this actually; it was somebody else. But we didn't come across this idea. So the Albert Bates would talk about the impregnation with organisms and so on, would it?
Yeah. He goes into great. There's also, I know that Edinburgh University have done quite a lot of studies on it. There are some quite serious studies being done on it in different places. And there have been, like loads of things that people do come up with these sort of outrageous claims and, you know, say, like you say, best thing since sliced bread. But, you know, sliced bread wasn't that great.
No, good for composting, I suppose. Yeah.
But do write to me if you want to. I'm very, like I say, I'm very happy if you want to write to me and connect up about things like that, and I'll try and point you in the right direction and find some other things. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Anybody else got anything to ask? Silence.
Very shy,
aren't they?
There's no kind of bad questions, wrong questions.
I can ask one more if you like. I didn't want to hog it.
Go on.
Well, I'm just wondering about there's a proposal at the moment near here to build one of these energy from waste plants. Actually, they're proposing to build an energy from waste plant and a plant alongside it to produce plastic flakes, you know, as part of a recycling process. And they're proposing to use some of the waste heat from the energy from waste plant to heat a couple of other businesses nearby. And I wondered if you do that, is it necessarily such a bad thing to produce energy from waste? As opposed, it depends what they're doing it, but they're talking about using hard to recycle stuff involving plastics and what have you, and to burn it and produce some electricity and also use some of the waste heat. And I wondered if under those circumstances, it's actually such a bad thing.
Well, it's a tricky one. I actually think it is a bad thing. And I think it's a bit disingenuous to call it energy from waste rather than just calling it incineration. I mean, you are destroying you know, materials doing that. You're also creating, although the incinerators are much better and less polluting than they were, they are still creating dioxins, furans, and other really nasty chemicals. I mean, dioxins are really particularly bad. Well, and furans, they're really, really bad. And although they're cleaned up a lot more than they used to be, and they go through all these kind of fluid beds and all the rest of it, they are still emitting really deadly particles, albeit at a very reduced rate. And as Dan was it Dan Knapp, I think, who I mentioned earlier with the Urban Ore project, he said, you know, what that means is and the stacks on the incinerators are taller, so they're actually spreading pollution over a wider area, but at a much lower rate. So it's a much slower death. Because, yeah, basically, because it used to be that, you know, you could sort of plot leukemia outbreaks around incinerators, that kind of thing. And yet they're very keen to say that it's a clean technology, but it's not clean. I mean, like I said right at the beginning, that I do feel a lot of sympathy for the local authorities, because they have a massive problem to deal with. You know, they have to deal with all this crap that's being produced by all these manufacturers. So things are not being manufactured properly. So, and that's why, you know, things are not being, we need to be more mindful about the way we consume. But it's a huge, great super tanker to turn around until we get to that kind of society where we're not producing all this crap and then having to burn it, or worse, you know, stick it on ships and ship it to Indonesia where they unload it, and then it causes plastic pollution there. So there have to be, so maybe as an interim step, it's just kind of necessary, but I'm still not even convinced about that, actually. I know that in Plymouth, I don't know if Barbara's here from Plymouth, you know, that they've put up the Barn Barton incinerator, waste to energy plant there, and they wanted to use the waste heat from that locally, but it's a problem because you can't kind of shift the heat very far. You know, it's kind of lack of joined up thinking in so many ways, and I think cities could do a far better job of, particularly cities, of dealing with things like that. They could actually do better source separation. They could actually, when I went up to see Graham Wiles, I talked about, you know, with the cardboard to caviar project, we also went to see a plastics factory called Intruplas, and they were taking in industrial plastics, not post-consumer, not domestic stuff, but the biggest part of the waste stream is from businesses anyway. So they were taking in plastics and shredding it up and melting it down and making kind of plastic lumber. In fact, my compost bins, which did, I didn't even mention them, but they were featured in that talk of the compost bins. The corner posts were made of that plastic lumber, and they used them for like pub furniture and canal things. It's actually very solid. It's a downcycling, so it's not the best solution, but at least it's keeping it out of a loop. It's keeping it in another loop in a way.
Yeah.
So it's a complicated one, that really, really difficult. I can see Pete's got his hand up. Or Becky. You got to unmute yourself. There you go.
I'm not in charge of the technology, Nicky, so hi.
Very wise.
This is a local question, but it's got a global implication, Nicky. I don't know whether your talk has covered any of this, but I've picked up on sort of radar over the last sort of year or so that mycelium, which you've alluded to, Merlin Sheldrake, but mycelium has an amazing ability to digest plastic, apparently. Do you have any views on that, Nicky? Is this scary Frankenstein technology, or could it be a way of cleaning the oceans and cleaning up some of the land that we have polluted so heavily with plastic? I mean, I don't know whether that's a valid question in this sort of talk. But
no, absolutely.
It's a very scientific question, I think.
No, it's very, very valid. Yeah, I mean, there's been some amazing, exciting developments with mycelium and fungal stuff to do with. There's and not just fungi, actually. There are some mealworms that enzymes, which probably is the fungi actually inside the mealworms that can digest polystyrene, for instance. There are some other plastics that can be digested. They are incredibly clever at evolving. I mean, if you listen to Merlin, he's talking about lichens and how they break down rocks and make that available to plants. So it's just another thing. But the trouble is there's just so much plastic. I mean, we're talking the scale is pretty huge, and we need to cut it right back. I mean, some of the plastics that are being produced now, it's a bit like if there was a crisp packet back in Henry V's day, it would still be a crisp packet now. It's that kind of, it's hundreds of years we're talking about before they start to break down some of the plastics. And of course, part of the problem is that they do break down into microplastics because they just break down into smaller fragments, but they're still there as microplastics. And then they're getting into our watercourses and ultimately into the ocean. And then they're being sucked up by plankton and go up and then re-go up through the food chain until they're concentrated in the bodies of fish that we're then eating. So now if we're eating fish, we're eating quite a proportion of plastic in our fish, the top of the food chain or near the top of the food chain. So it is a massive problem. And yeah, I mean, I think it's fantastic what fungi can do. And the big authority on that, Paul Stamets, I've got behind me, I've got several books by Paul Stamets here. And he talks about, fungi cleaning up oil spills, for instance, which is another thing that's done quite a lot by mycoremediation of oil spills. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a really exciting area. There's a whole group called the Bioneers. You can look up, it's another thing you can look up, Bioneers, and they meet and they're doing things with biomimicry and all the rest of it. So I do actually think, our salvation is in natural systems. The trouble is we're giving it such a bloody hammering in so many ways that it can't, Gaia is kind of rebelling in a way,
Yeah.
back.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicky. Anybody else?
That shut them up.
Yeah. What I will do is I will send everyone the links via email that you've talked about tonight, Nicky, along with a link to a survey.
Hester's trying to say
Hester.
something.
Yeah, I don't really have a question, but I do appreciate that last question. I've forgotten who it was from, but because some of the your talk was really good talk, but I was kind of getting a bit bogged down with all the graphs and thinking, oh my gosh, this is so depressing. But actually I've been listening to that Radio 4 program by Merlin Sheldrake as well, and finding it really fascinating. And it's just like a little glimmer of hope. And also Rob Hopkins, I've got his book and have read that his book on From What Is to What If, giving ourselves the permission to reimagine, allowing ourselves to imagine what the world could be, and actually owning that we actually can make it. We can make changes. We individually have responsibility to make changes. And so I just wanted to chip in and say thank you for the question, really, because it's sort of and thank you for your talk as well, for the immense information all over the world, bringing it all together from your lifelong work. What am I saying?
I don't know. It's really
That's
good.
Is there anything constructive? Oh, and the chanterelles in those bags, and I was sitting here doing some knitting actually, and I had my head down and I looked up because I was caught by what you and saw these bags, saw Rob Hopkins with
Oh yeah.
and then the bags hanging and seeing all these mushrooms growing out of it, and I thought, oh, I missed that bit. What was that all about? That sounds really intriguing. So that looked really fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's just an example, you know. I mean, so many people could do that, and every city in the world, you know, they could have sort of urban farms with mushroom growing. I went to another one. I mean, there's so much stuff I didn't put in there, but I was at a project in King's Cross, which was wonderful. There's an incredible woman there who goes around on a cargo bike, you know, these electric bike with a kind of like a big ice cream thing on the front.
Yeah.
And she goes around all the little local cafes and gets coffee grounds and food waste and all sorts of things. And they've got a little mini anaerobic digester in the Camley Street. It's amazing. Around the back of King's Cross, there's this wildlife park. It's quite incongruous. It's right on the canal, a beautiful little wildlife park. And she takes it there, and they've got it like a garden shed with a kind of garden shed sized anaerobic digester. They make methane. They produce heat. So they made me a cup of tea with the kettle off the, you know, heated off the methane. And you know, it's great. I love those things. There's this sort of undercurrent. I've been very privileged with my work to go around some of these sort of back streets of London and see these little projects, and you think it's amazing how people get together around a little idea and do it. And that's what I've
Yeah.
sort of inspire from people. It's like, you know, you can't change the world, but you can change maybe a little bit of your local area.
Yes, you can change your mindset, and that's the other thing, because I don't have the education. I'm not my I don't think scientifically or engineering. You know, that's just not my thing. But I'm really in awe of people like you who do get it and who can make sense of it all, and it's inspiring.
I'm not really scientific or engineering, like, you know, I went to art college. I did sculpture at St. Martin's, you know, it's completely bloody useless thing to do, really. But I think what it did do is enable me to think a bit more laterally and maybe creatively. And then, you know, if you don't know things, you find people that do know about that, and you talk to them, you know, and then they come and help you do things. So that's the thing. It's like Margaret Mead said, that quote from Margaret Mead, which I love, you know, it's not individuals, it's small groups of thoughtful people that change the world. And I think that's really important. So, you know, if you can get into a group of people, the synergy that comes off from, you know, different people coming together. And like you say, I mean, it's great, your contribution, like Rob says, you know, in his From What Is to What If, you know, the way that they get together with groups and sort of play games and have, you know, imagine different scenarios, and then that builds into something, you know. Well, often or not, it doesn't, but, you know, things do happen because of interactions between people. You know, it's as simple as that, really. And thinking optimistically, I think, you know, I'm a sort of incredible optimist, I guess. And I always think that things are going to work out somehow in the end. And actually, we just get on and do the things that we can do. Oh, there's Sophie. Bye-bye, Sophie. We do the things that we can do and kind of interact with people, then, you know, that's how things change.
Thank you, Nicky.
Thank you.
Do we have anything else before? No. That was really inspiring, Nicky, I think.
Oh.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, it's
Thank
really
you,
nice.
Brian.
Very nice to see you.
Nice to hear you again.
Yeah, and you, Bettina. It's nice to see my old friend Steve Day
Thank
here.
you, Nicky.
Just,
Enjoyed
you know,
it.
we were at school together in Finchley in London
Wow.
in 1960s. When did we leave? I left in 1969, I think.
That'll be right. And also, I lived in King's Cross, so I know the Camley Street place
Did you?
very well, actually. It's a lovely place. It's been there for a long, long time as well.
Yeah. It's great. They've got things like peregrine falcons there, and it's amazing what they've got there.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Tiny little space.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's the really interesting thing, is these community projects all around the world. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, that Blessed Unrest one was interesting that Paul Hawkins started, and they actually formed a website with it, and he tried to network all the projects in the whole world, and it kind of crashed because it was too big. It was just too much. You know, they had an office in Paris, and they had, you know, they had places all over the world, but the funding ran out, and then the whole thing kind of crashed, unfortunately. But you know, the project's still going. Well, lots of them are. So yeah, I urge you to look at his talk, because I think he's great. Oh, you still got your hand up there, Becky and Pete. Is that a new hand?
That's not a new hand, but I just wanted to say thank you very much, Nicky. That was
Oh,
brilliant.
sorry. Good. Well, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Thank
How
you.
do you take your own hand down?
I don't know.
Lower it.
I'll just put it up like that. Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting, and loads of content. So lots of ideas. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I suppose the nice thing about Zoom is that we can connect up with people in Worcestershire, Scotland, you know, and wherever. One of the composting ones, we had people from Italy, didn't we? That was very exciting for me.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Really good. Thank you everyone for coming. And I will send you all an email with the links and with a link for a survey to fill in. If you could, it'd be really appreciated, because it helps with our funding.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you, Nicky.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.